Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The U.S. Federal Reserve is holding steady, keeping its benchmark interest rate at 4.25% to 4.5%, though it signaled the possibility of 2 cuts later this year. Such a cautious stance reflects growing uncertainty over President Trump's tariff policies and their economic impact. Meanwhile, major economies, including the U.S., Japan, and the U.K., have either frozen interest rates or are expected to do so. Korea faces mounting pressure as U.S. trade policies target its trade surplus, raising concerns over potential FTA renegotiations. At the same time, the OECD has slashed South Korea's growth forecast from 2.1% to 1.5%, citing risks from global trade conflicts and slowing demand. For a closer look into the situation, we invite Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea, here in the studio with us. Welcome, Professor.
Happy to be here.
And also joining us online is Kim Yong-jin, professor at Seogang Business School. Great to see you again, Professor.
Good evening.
So let's start our discussion with Professor Yang. The U.S. FOMC meeting decided to keep interest rates unchanged at the current level. And could you tell us the reasoning behind the decision? And
Okay, well, the most important factor behind the decision has to be inflation. And inflation, consumer price index inflation, was down slightly from where it was in January, from 3.1% to 2.8%. Core inflation is also down a little bit to 3.1 core inflation, 2.8 headline inflation. That's still above the Fed's goal of 2%, but it is falling nicely. But it's still higher than the goal, so they did not see any urgency about lowering the rates. Similarly, with employment, 151,000 jobs were created in February. That's lower than 160,000 that was expected, but it's roughly in line with where it was in the last 12 months. The average job creation for the last 12 months was 168,000. So if you look at the numbers, there's no clear reason why the Fed should lower the rates. So they're keeping it steady, but they did note possible problems. Now, the latest statistics that is available to the Fed is January and February. But if you look at the timing, the time that those data was collected, it was during mid-February, and that was mostly before the current chaos over tariffs or macroeconomic policies or mass firing at the Department of Government Efficiency has taken place. So right now, even though the actual numbers do not really show that much of a change, there has been a lot of changes in inflationary expectations, according to, say, University of Michigan surveys. Right now, the one-year expected inflation has risen from 4.3% to 4.9%. 5-year expected inflation rate has risen from 3.4 to 3.9%. And consumer confidence is falling very quickly. And future expectations about the job market is also falling very quickly. So right now, the current data doesn't show that much of a change, but these possible future signals are showing a vast amount of volatility, and we don't know whether the inflation will pick up. We don't know if the real economy will slow down. So I think the Fed is keeping all its bullets in their guns for now, just in case they have to use it.
Right, so they have to look at how the economy would unfold to make a further decision on that. Now, the Fed also projected a year-end federal funds rate of 3.9% in its summary of economic projections, suggesting 2 quarter percentage point rate cuts by the end of the year. Professor Kim, why did the Fed maintain its December forecast first?
Well, Professor Yang explained very well. I mean, he explained everything. I mean, it's a very confusing condition. The Fed, largely kept with the market expectations, freezing the base interest rate at 4.25 to 4.5%. We can get some clues why the central bank maintained its December forecast Chairman Jerome Powell commented at the press conference, which wrapped up around 3:20 p.m. Eastern Time. They kept the rate same due to, it's just very confusing, possible economic slowdown and the Trump administration's tariff policy. This tariff policy may pose a challenge by threatening to slow growth and quicken inflation at the same time. Moreover, policies are not yet determined and changing frequently. And the uncertainty in terms of the impact of the tariff policies on inflation and economic growth is like uncertain, and also the uncertainty also is increasing. I guess, the Fed may have a strategy of wait and see until the time the dust is settled down. One interesting thing to check is that new projections for the base rate cut showed that 11 out of 19 policy makers expect the Fed to cut rate at least twice this year, down from 15 officials who had penciled in at least 2 cuts in December. This means that there might be very little room for further rate cut at the moment. And also it can be also seen at the fact that the Fed also approved plans to slow the reduction of its $6.8 trillion asset portfolio to avoid money market strains this year after lawmakers raised the federal debt limit.
Mm-hmm. So a cautious approach by the Fed is expected, as you pointed out, with inflation risks and trade uncertainties. Rate cuts may be more limited than expected. Now, let's also talk about Trump's tariff war, Professor Yang. Major countries like the U.S., Japan, the U.K. have either decided to freeze or are expected to do so. The Bank of Korea, however, hinted at the possibility of another rate cut. What do you expect at the Bank of Korea's monetary policy meeting next month?
Okay, well, just to give the general conditions first, last year before the U.S. started its rate cuts and Korea started its rate cuts, the interest rate differential was 2.0 percentage points. And because the U.S. cut the rates faster than Korea, the interest rate differential shrunk to 1.5 percentage points. And now, because Korea dropped the rates one time during February, it's back to 1.75% difference. Now, if the U.S. Fed does not drop the rates further, then I think Korea has one bullet left, one rate cut that's possible, because they don't really want to increase the interest rate differential more than where it was last year. That was historically the biggest rate differential.
2%.
So 2 percentage points.
Right.
So I think they're going to at least keep to that rule for now. I think the BOK thinks that they have one bullet left. And according to BOK calculations, the 3 rate cuts that they had so far from last year and this year did do some good in slowing down the decline of the Korean economy, but perhaps it wasn't felt very much in the economy. I personally think that the rate cut in February was wasted because the government, the National Assembly, did not follow with the supplementary spending bill. Right now they have one bullet left. I'm not sure if they will use it in April unless the situation is exactly right. And that means the current market has to be stable. That means the money that stops flowing into the Seoul housing market, or at least the money that's flowing there is limited. And there is a very good chance that supplementary budget bill will be passed either right before or right after the April meeting. If those conditions are not in place, I don't think they will make the cut. I would not recommend it. Now, if the Fed's plans for 2 more rate cuts is realized, then I think the BOK will have 2 more bullets that they can use. But right now, I don't think we can count on it because we're not sure if the Fed will drop the rates additional 0.5 percentage points this year. It'll all depend on how the data comes in, how the tariff will work itself through the U.S. economy.
Right, so we'll have to wait and see how that goes. Meanwhile, there's growing concern over the tariff bill ahead of the U.S. announcement on reciprocal tariffs next month. Kevin Hassett, chairman of the U.S. National Economic Council, singled out Korea as a trade deficit country with the U.S. Professor Kim, could this be interpreted as an implicit demand to eliminate non-tariff barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. It is quite interesting to see how the U.S. government specifically pointed out South Korea when they talk about the trade deficit. The U.S. has its largest trade deficit with China and the second largest with the EU. South Korea comes, eighth. And moreover, South Korea, has a FTA with the U.S. And both China and the EU do not have one with the U.S. Probably non-tariff barriers to trade appear to be the primary reason South Korea is put together in the same category as China and the EU. It is very clear how the U.S. perceived Korean trade practice when listening to Kevin Hassett, the director of the White House's National Economic Council. He said, during an interview with CNBC on Monday, if you look at why those trade deficits exist, it's because they have, non-tariff barriers and high tariffs that makes it hard for U.S. firms to compete. Also, during the meeting with, Trade Minister Chung In-kyo, who recently visited the U.S., Washington representatives insist that South Korea has a lot to revise when it comes to sanitation and quarantine measures against U.S. agricultural product. Considering the fact that Hassett, brought up Korea in the same breath as the EU and China, South Korea will be included in the list of 15 countries on which Trump administration will impose the reciprocal tariffs.
Mm-hmm. So though South Korea may not have the largest trade deficit, U.S. focus on this non-tariff barriers could mean tougher negotiations are ahead. Now, Professor Yang, this pressure from America has raised concerns that the existing free trade agreement between the two countries could be rendered ineffective. There's speculation that the U.S. might demand renegotiations or even come up with a new agreement. What's your forecast on this?
Okay, well, the problem is we don't know what Trump's end goal is. Right now, there's scores of different goals that people think Trump is chasing, and a lot of it is just contradictory. You just mentioned trade deficit, but there's also a goal of bringing manufacturing back to the United States, increasing jobs in the U.S. There's also more tariff revenue so that they can afford their tax cuts. Or there's even a mention that Trump wants to sort of engineer a recession to lower the interest rates so that the U.S. can refinance its government debt at a cheaper interest rate when it all comes to maturity sometime this year. And tariff is one method of doing that. So there's scores of explanations. There's all are somewhat contradictory. So we don't exactly know what they want, but at least given with what they said about Korea so far, U.S. is very unsatisfied with the KORUS FTA, partially because the U.S. trade deficit has been increasing greatly in the last 8 years or so. The trade deficit for the United States against Korea has about doubled. When Trump was in his first term, Korea was not among the top 10 countries with trade deficit with the United States, but now Korea is ranked about 8th. Trump wants more semiconductor investment in the U.S., but without giving subsidies. That means he's going to have at least 30 or 40% tariffs on semiconductors. That'll be long-lasting. I don't know if he can actually do it. He's going to face a lot of attacks from AI researchers and semiconductor users, but he may decide to do it anyway. But if he wants tariff revenues to reduce the income taxes and corporate taxes, then there's virtually nothing that Korea can do, because what Trump wants for the United States is to get money. So until Trump clarifies his goal, we can't really react. We can't really give him what he wants because we don't know what he wants. So we're going to have to play it very loosely. We're going to have to be very flexible. And we're going to have to, I think, mention that these type of policies will hurt the United States in the medium to long run, or even the short run, to try to convince Trump that the tariffs are a bad idea. And I think they will seek to renegotiate Chorus FTA because they're going to seek to renegotiate all FTAs. Mm-hmm. And if you notice, all the major countries that Trump has hit with threats or actual high tariffs so far, they're all countries that have FTAs with U.S. Canada, Mexico. He withdrew it, but Colombia, they all have FTAs with the United States.
Right. So engaging in negotiations with the U.S. will be definitely important. But this is quite difficult from the point of South Korea, because we are now in a leadership vacuum, which is caused by the martial law and impeachment crisis with President Yoon Suk-yeol. Professor Kim, what realistic policies can be pursued as of now to respond to America's tariff pressure?
Yeah, it is a tough and sad question to answer, right? I have been worried about the leadership vacuum, which may not allow Korean government in its current form to make any critical decision on the trade issues. Now, however, sometimes I think it might be good for us to have the vacuum in the critical moment of negotiation with Mr. Trump, because he may ignore leaders who did not have been elected properly, or not proper power, and not to push his decision too much. So we may, just tell them the current government does not have the authority enough to decide the things which might affect the national security issues. Is that too optimistic? Too simple? But well, anyway. But it is kind of critical situation. So I believe Korean government tries to persuade the U.S. government with precise numbers, like exact rate of tariff imposed on the U.S. product, due to FTAs at the moment. And the reason we had large amount of trade surplus with the U.S., especially in 2024. We exported a lot of machines and tools to support the U.S. Factory construction, and also in January we experienced a huge deficit, and then they have to our government have to prepare some items like further investment in the U.S., including shipbuilding and then Alaska natural gas pipeline construction. And even, beef import, and also the defense expenses for negotiations. That would be realistic.
Mm-hmm. Well, what you mentioned was quite interesting. Leadership uncertainty poses challenges, but it might also delay America's, pressure on trade talks. We'll have to see how that goes. But now, Professor Yang, with President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment ruling pending, we're expecting the ruling to come in the next few days. How do you think the Korean economy would be affected, especially taking consideration the court's impeachment ruling on former President Park Geun-hye in 2016?
Okay, well, whatever decision the court will make, I think we will have a slight upward bump. And that's because the uncertainty has been removed. But will we go back to a so-called normal path? Probably not. And that's because, say, Yoon wins his case. Then you're bringing back a president who declared martial law for arguably unreasonable reason. So unless the president can guarantee that he will not pull a stunt like this again, I think there will always be some kind of uncertainty involved. And if Yoon loses the case, then we will have a new presidential election. So uncertainty will continue, though at a slightly lower level, until the presidential election takes place. But I should also emphasize that even if things return to so-called normal, it'll be a tough year because Korea had a low growth rate to begin with. Korea has a very low potential growth rate, and that's not going to change with the resolution of some of the Korea political uncertainty, and the Trump risk will still be there. So, yeah, things will get, I think, a little better, but if you think that the elimination of resolution of political turmoil will get us back to normality, something like a normal growth rate, then I think that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So it's going to take time, definitely. We'll have to see whether South Korea's economy can weather this storm with minimal disruption, or if the uncertainty creates deeper economic challenges. We'll have to follow this closely in the weeks ahead. But for now, we'll need to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Yang and Professor Kim. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.